What is up, guys, and welcome to my review of Leigh Whannell's latest film, Wolfman. This was one of my most anticipated films last year when it was first supposed to come out, and then it instantly became one of my most anticipated films this year. I've always been a fan of what Leigh Whannell had done with James Wan. These guys as a creative team have been one of the most successful creative teams in horror for like the last 20 years. They created Saw together, they created Insidious, and when Leigh Whannell spawned off and started doing directing himself, I believe a lot of people kind of had my doubts about him. I was like, I don't know. I think James Wan's the powerful one in this little duo here. We'll see what he does. Insidious 3, I think, is the best of that franchise. Then yet again, you had Upgrade come out, and I'm like, I don't know. It feels like something I've seen before. Went to go see it. Absolutely loved that movie. And then by the time Invisible Man came out, I just had no doubts this was going to be awesome, and he knocked that film out of the park. So aside from just being another Leigh Whannell film, I'm a massive fan of vampire films especially, but even werewolf films. And I've been saying for years, when are we going to get a werewolf resurgence? We seem to be in a bit of a vampire one, but werewolves have always kind of been a little bit more sparing, a little bit more few and far between as far as the really good ones especially. And so when you tell me that Leigh Whannell is going from what he did with reimagining The Invisible Man to now doing that to The Wolfman, I am so fucking there. And the basic premise for this reimagining is you have a man who takes his wife and his daughter back to his childhood home in the Oregon wilderness to take care of his recently deceased father's estate. And while they are at this little farm property, they are attacked by a beast. And as you can assume, the father gets scratched very early on in the movie, starts to become infected, and so while they are all trying to ward off this beast and survive the night, they have another monster that is growing inside of their four walls. So starting off with the positives for Wolfman, one thing that I will tell you is that Leigh Whannell just knows how to do cool things with the camera. There's a lot of really interesting things done early on as far as camera angles, much like how he did in Upgrade and a few sequences in The Invisible Man during this crash sequence. There's a few sequences throughout the film where the camera changes POV from the wolf to the human characters and shows how their perspectives are different as far as the lighting of everything, as far as the sound of everything. So very cool, very innovative. He's one of those filmmakers that always brings some style to what he does. And especially with the way that he does camera angles, I think that he is starting to have a bit of a signature style where give it another film or two and I might be able to pick out a Leigh Whannell film just based off of an action sequence. Christopher Abbott plays the lead here named Blake, and I think he does a really good job. I think that he is instantly sympathetic. He's a character that you really feel for, and as he is going through this very tragic situation where you know he's very ill-fated, it's just a matter of when things are going to turn, it's an effective performance to get the emotions out of you that you want in a tale like that. And I also think that especially the second half of the film where much more of his performance is relying on physical performance, facial expressions, and the way that he walks and the way that he moves inside of the different makeup effects, he also does very well with that. So very capable lead. I don't know if I've seen him in anything before, but he's definitely the standout as far as acting goes in Wolfman. The moments that we do get with body horror, with transformation scenes here, are good old-fashioned practical effects. And while I wish we could have gotten a lot more, and I will get into that, what we do get as far as teeth coming out, as far as fingernails peeling away, and claws starting to grow in, and bones starting to restructure. I mean, it's not American Werewolf in London level, nowhere close. I don't think anything ever will be, but for a modern take on a werewolf transformation that is going for a very unique spin, I like the fact that they kept it practical, and the shots that we do get are very stomach churning. It's much more akin to like David Cronenberg's The Fly than any other werewolf transformations that you've seen. There's also some really good sound design here, and I think sound design is actually kind of the primary source of any kind of tension or any kind of horror that you're getting in this movie, aside from the little bits of body horror I was just describing. Most of the film is this family sitting inside of this farmhouse and various places in this farm property, hearing the wolf or hearing things out in nature and wondering what it is, having their mind kind of picture what the sounds are that they're hearing, and you as an audience member doing the same thing. And I'm not going to spoil exactly what happens. There's another really cool sequence that's very unique as Blake starts to develop certain abilities that has to do with his sense of sound that was very cool. And the last thing that I'll say here is that I do commend Leigh Whannell for trying something bold. He takes some big swings here. He does a werewolf film in a way that you have never seen before. And if you're going to do a reimagining of a classic Universal monster film in 2025, I think that is the right approach. He did a very unique spin on The Invisible Man, and that paid off very well for me and for a lot of others. And with Wolfman, you're going to have a very divisive effect here, as you do anytime you take a big swing. Some people are going to love how unique it is, are going to love how bold and how wild and how unexpected things are. And you're going to have others that are going to think this is way too weird. This is not recognizable at all of what I think of as a werewolf film. And I will tell you, no matter how many people fall on either side of that argument, once this thing starts to get seen this weekend, I'm going to completely understand both sides. And me, myself, there's certain things that I really like as far as the bold swings that he takes, and there's certain things that I really did not like and did not understand and thought that he went a bit too far away from what a traditional werewolf film is. But regardless of where that mix is for me, I'll at least commend him for trying something. But with that being said, I was massively disappointed in this movie. Massively disappointed. And I don't know if it's just my expectations for Leigh Whannell that has caused me to be so callous to what my end result of this experience was. Maybe if it was just another Blumhouse movie by a director I've never heard of, I would actually appreciate some of the bold swings a little bit more. But Leigh Whannell has created a bit of an expectation for us, where as a writer, he has done so well with what he has done with James Wan as well as his own films. As a director, he is 3 for 3 before we get to Wolfman. And so when I walked into this, I had no doubt in my mind that I was going to love this film, that this was going to be one of my favorites of the year, and it was going to be yet another statue on the mantle of how badass Leigh Whannell is as a filmmaker. And I am here to tell you, for my own personal taste, this is my least favorite thing that he has ever done as a director, but especially as a writer. Just like with The Invisible Man, Leigh tried to implement a modern take on that story by weaving in some kind of a theme, some kind of a commentary that lends itself to that character and that type of horror. In Invisible Man, it was that toxic, abusive relationship and somebody being trapped in that and feeling like they're always being watched. And to me, that worked wonderfully. In Wolfman, he's going for something that's much more of a theme and a commentary on abusive parenting, overbearing parenting, breaking that generational curse where you had a bad childhood and trying not to implement what you experienced onto your kids. And the problem is that's a really interesting thing to do and can weave itself very naturally and organically into the Wolfman lore. But they hammer you over the head so fucking hard in the first 20 minutes of this movie trying to shout at you what they are getting ready to explore here. And then for the next 2 acts, it just completely fucking disappears from the movie. Like, there are so many scenes where you have Christopher Abbott stopping to tell his daughter how important it is for him to take care of her and how it's his job to take care of her and how he always wants to make sure that she feels safe. And it just happens over and over. And it's like, my God, dude, we get it. I understand what the fuck we're doing here. Move on. And then the entire second and third act, when Christopher Abbott is transforming, whenever his body is degenerating, whenever he is losing himself, it never really loops back around to implement that theme into what is going on. Added in with the frustration that even the chunk of the film that we do get a lot of this theme and this commentary about generational parenting and everything, it's not only heavy-handed, it's messy as hell. You have an opening where Christopher Abbott's character is a child, and his dad's certainly overbearing, but they're also out hunting. They have rifles that can kill themselves and others, and there's supposedly a wild animal out there that is dangerous, that can kill them. So there's a couple of spots where he freaks out on his kid, and he's like, you gotta listen to me. Like, what are you doing? Why are you off in the woods where I can't find you? You gotta stay by me. Like, he's a little bit more of an asshole in the way that he says it than when I just conveyed it, but totally reasonable, understandable thing for a parent to be a little frustrated about and trying to jar the attention of their kid. Hey, motherfucker, we can die. Stop. And if that's not messy enough, immediately after that, you catch up with Christopher Abbott 30 years later. He's got a wife. He's got his daughter. They're walking down the street, busy city streets. She's balancing on like this little barrier here. And he asks, hey, honey, get down from there. It's not safe. Hey, honey, get down from there. It's not safe. And she's right next to traffic. And then what does she do? Ignores him, and then she stumbles off of the thing and runs into somebody, and he grabs her and he's like, why the fuck aren't you listening to me? And then immediately after that, he goes home, and the way that they yet again give an example that, maybe he's got his father's temper brewing inside of him, is he's cooking dinner, and his wife walks in having a loud work conversation, and while this would not bother me, it clearly bothered him, and he's like, hey, honey, can you take that conversation to the other room, please? Totally ignores him. Hey, honey, can you take that conversation into the other room, please? Totally ignores him. Blah, 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 blah. And then she hangs up the phone and looks at him and goes, can you not do that? And again, like, I'm not bothered if my wife is on the phone and I'm cooking dinner, but he asked her in a very nice way. Not a super unreasonable thing to ask. You just go into another room. And yet, the previous example of the girl in the street and this is intended to be like the two little stepping stones of us understanding, he's about to boil over. It's that inner rage. It's that wolf inside of his overbearing dickhead father, and he's about to ruin their lives with his fury. No, didn't quite land for me. And so the way they conveyed their message and the complete failure at executing their message in the second and third act led that to be just such a frustrating and empty piece of this movie. And speaking of empty, without some kind of commentary like that actually making an impact by the end of the film, the story that we get here, as well as the characters that inhabit it, are very thin and empty. Christopher Abbott and Julia Garner, husband and wife, marriage is on the rocks for reasons that we don't ever really get to understand. We don't get to know them long enough to really invest ourselves in their marriage or the tragedy of Christopher Abbott turning into this beast. And then you have the daughter, which very easily could be something you could score with me, because I have such a strong bond with my daughters that's something that could really pull on my heartstrings if you execute in the right way. And they just didn't. And throughout the course of the film, like, you don't really feel any kind of a journey or any kind of a character arc or growth with Julia Garner's character of the mom or the little girl or anything. They're just kind of going through the motions. It's a very basic, straightforward story without a whole lot of change in a character dynamic. So we don't get a theme. We don't have any kind of a payoff with that. There's not much of a story here. It's just three people stuck in a farmhouse for the majority of the film while a beast roams around outside. You don't get a whole lot with character development or character growth here. Well, my God, at least there's going to be some badass werewolf kills or some gore or some seriously like tense jump scares, horror sequences, something like that, right? Not really. Again, you do get a little bit of carnage candy with some of the body horror, with some of the body, degeneration, with the wound that first sets this thing off, the slash across the forearm. Of course, there is some werewolf tension later on, some chase scenes and stuff like that, but they're very few and far between. And that's really all you get. And so it just feels like anything that you would go to this movie for, classic werewolf action, some great characters, an interesting story, a really introspective theme, every single piece of that recipe feels half or quarter cooked in this end result of Wolfman, which just makes it such an empty, bland experience, which are two words that never make sense to describe anything that Leigh Whannell works on. And the last thing that I'll say before I wrap this up, which again feels like yet another thing that it almost makes me in disbelief that this is a Leigh Whannell film and this is a Leigh Whannell script, because typically he is so not this thing. Like he writes things so smartly that this stood out like a sore thumb. One of my biggest pet peeves for a movie to do is to not have any confidence in its audience to pick up on what it's doing, to pick up on what it's saying, or to tie something early on in the film with something that's shown later on in the film. And so you have to have a character explain it to the audience. And that happens a couple of times here, and I audibly fucking groaned. Like, there is something that you're shown in the beginning, and they intend it as a reveal later on, and it's not a surprise whatsoever. So, like, I almost hesitate to think that it was meant to be some kind of a surprise reveal, but it's executed in that way. So not only is it an obvious reveal, but you actually have, after a so obvious reveal, Julia Garner's character, that amidst all of this chaos and craziness and carnage that is happening, she takes her daughter, pulls her daughter to the side, and has a little sidebar conversation to explain what we just saw, as if we're fucking morons and can't put 2 and 2 together and get 4. I hate that. Absolutely hate that. And the fact that this movie did it not once, but at least twice that I can remember, again, Did Leigh Whannell have like a week to write this script? Was he put under the Blumhouse grinder schedule where they say, hey, here's $5, you have a week, let's get this thing out quick? I don't know. I am inclined to believe it was something like that because I have way more faith and way more examples of amazing work from Leigh Whannell than the Blumhouse machine. But they're the ones that helped him do Invisible Man. So I don't know what the hell happened here. I genuinely don't. But so many things about this movie just rang completely empty. And while there's things to commend, the overall experience was a massive disappointment that I can't see myself ever revisiting. So overall, guys, this one is inevitably going to be one of my most disappointing of the year. And we're only like 20 days, not even 20 days into the new year. So yay. If you like werewolf films, you could check it out to see this bold, unique swing that he takes, but set your expectations low for the story and everything else that we're used to seeing from Leigh Whannell, because this is just not one of his better efforts. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. Click up here for a playlist of all of Leigh Whannell's films. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss all the rest of 2025's shenanigans. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.